In 1875, deep in the New Mexico territory, a widow named Lenora Pritchett arrived at her dead husband's trading post, expecting nothing but solitude and debt. What she found instead was a Navajo warrior bathing in her creek, and the moment their eyes met across the water, everything she thought she knew about survival, propriety, and her own guarded heart began to unravel. Before we dive into the story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more incredible stories tomorrow. Also, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's continue with the story. The wagon wheels had stopped turning 3 hours past sundown, and Lenora Pritchett stood before what remained of her inheritance. The trading post leaned slightly to the left, its wooden sign hanging by a single nail, creaking in the night wind. Her husband's legacy, a rotting building at the edge of nowhere, surrounded by red dust and silence. She'd traveled 6 weeks from Missouri to reach this place, every mile taking her further from the life she'd known. Theodore had died 4 months ago, his lawyer's letter brief and cold. The property was hers now, along with whatever debts he'd accumulated. Her father had called her a fool for making the journey. Perhaps he was right. The next morning arrived with brutal sunlight and the realization that the well was dry. Lenora took 2 empty buckets and followed the sound of running water behind the property, pushing through scrub brush and cottonwoods until she found the creek. The water ran clear over smooth stones, the first beautiful thing she'd seen since crossing into the territory. That's when she saw him. He stood waist-deep in the current, water streaming down bronze skin, marked with scars she could see even from 30 feet away. A Navajo warrior, his long black hair loose around his shoulders, completely unaware of her presence. She should have turned away, should have run back to the house. Every rule of decency she'd ever been taught screamed at her to avert her eyes. But she didn't move. There was something about the careful way he moved, favoring his left side, that held her frozen. Something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of pain, carried long and quietly. He cupped water in his hands, washing his face, and when he lowered them, his eyes found hers across the distance. For a moment that stretched like honey, neither of them moved. His expression was unreadable, dark eyes steady on hers. No shame, no anger, just recognition of some kind, as though he'd been expecting her. Then he turned, moving through the water to where his clothes lay on the bank. He dressed quickly, efficiently, never taking his eyes from her. When he was done, he stepped into the cottonwoods and vanished like smoke. Lenora stood there long after he'd gone, her heart hammering against her ribs, wondering why she hadn't screamed. Lenora spent the day trying to forget what she'd seen, throwing herself into the impossible task of making the trading post livable. The roof leaked in 3 places. Mice had nested in the storage room. Theodore's ledgers told a story she didn't want to read. Page after page of debts to merchants, suppliers, even the territorial marshal. Her husband had been drowning long before his heart gave out. By evening, her hands were blistered and her back ached. She heated beans over a struggling fire and ate standing up, too tired to sit. When she finally stepped onto the porch for air, she nearly dropped her plate. Fresh rabbit meat lay on the top step, still warm, cleaned and ready to cook. She looked out into the gathering darkness, seeing nothing but shadows and brush. Her pulse quickened. He'd been here, watching, close enough to leave this gift without her hearing a single footstep. She should have been terrified. Instead, she picked up the meat and took it inside. The next morning brought firewood, stacked neatly beside the door in a way that spoke of careful hands. The morning after that, she discovered the broken shutter on the east window had been repaired, its hinges oiled and silent. On the fourth day, she found a small bundle of herbs tied with grass, plants she didn't recognize, but whose sharp, clean scent suggested medicine. He never showed himself, but Lenora felt his presence like a weight in the air, protective and watchful. She caught herself looking toward the cottonwoods more often than she should, wondering if he was there, wondering why he kept helping her, wondering why the thought of him didn't frighten her the way it should. On the fourth night, a sound woke her from thin sleep, something moving in the barn. Lenora grabbed Theodore's rifle from above the door, her hand steadier than her breathing. The barn door hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze. She stepped inside, rifle raised. He was collapsed in the hay, his breathing shallow and rapid. Even in the dim moonlight filtering through the slats, she could see the fever flush on his skin. His shirt was dark with blood on the left side, the same side he'd been favoring in the creek. This time, when their eyes met, his were glazed with pain and fever. He tried to speak, but only a rough sound came out. He was trying to apologize, she realized, trying to explain why he'd trespassed. Lenora lowered the rifle and made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. She couldn't lift him alone, but she could help him stand. She wedged her shoulder under his arm, feeling the heat of his fever through both their clothes. "Come on," she said, her voice firm. "We're getting you inside." He didn't fight her. Together, they stumbled toward the house. Lenora dragged him to Theodore's old bed, her muscles screaming in protest. She'd nursed her husband through his final illness, knew the basics of fever care. But this was different. The wound in his side was angry and swollen, a bullet graze that had festered into something dangerous. She stripped away his shirt, trying to ignore the landscape of scars across his chest and back. Old wounds, some clean and some jagged, told stories she couldn't read. Focus on what matters, she told herself, and went for Theodore's medical kit. The warrior drifted in and out of consciousness as she worked, murmuring words in a language that flowed like water over stones. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, her jaw set against his sharp intake of breath. He didn't cry out, didn't fight. Just gripped the bed frame until his knuckles went white. "I'm sorry," she whispered, threading the needle. "This is going to hurt worse." His eyes found hers, clearer for just a moment. He nodded once. Permission. The stitching took forever. Her hands shook, but her stitches held. When she finished, she pressed a clean cloth against the wound and wrapped it tight. He'd passed out somewhere in the middle, which was probably a mercy. For 3 days, the fever raged. Lenora barely slept, changing his bandages, forcing water between his lips, wiping his face with cool cloths. He thrashed sometimes, calling out names she didn't understand. Once, he grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise, his eyes wild and unseeing. She didn't pull away, just put her other hand over his and spoke softly until he calmed. On the third morning, the fever broke. She woke in the chair beside the bed to find him watching her, his dark eyes clear and present. He studied her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle, his expression unreadable. "Water," he said, his voice like gravel. She helped him sit up, holding the cup to his lips. He drank slowly, wincing with each movement. When he finished, he looked at her again, something shifting in his expression. "Ashki," he said, touching his chest. Then again, slower. "My name, Ashki." "Lenora," she replied, the formal introductions absurd given that she'd just spent 3 days keeping him alive. He nodded, testing the name silently. His English was rough but understandable. "Why you help me?" She didn't have a good answer. Couldn't explain the instinct that had overridden every warning she'd been raised with. So she told him the simple truth. "You needed help, and you've been helping me." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He looked away first, his jaw tight. "I bring you trouble," he said quietly. "White woman with Navajo man. Trouble comes." "Trouble's already here," Lenora said, thinking of Theodore's debts. "What's a little more?" Ashkey healed faster than Lenora expected. Within a week, he was moving around the trading post, ignoring her protests that he needed rest. He worked in silence mostly, communicating through gestures and the occasional halting English word. She learned his language too, the tilt of his head that meant yes, the slight narrowing of his eyes that meant he'd heard something she hadn't. He fixed the sagging porch, replaced rotted boards, cleared brush from around the well. Lenora found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing the efficiency in every movement. Nothing wasted. He worked like a man who'd learned long ago that survival meant usefulness. One afternoon, while he was mending fence posts in the sun, she brought him water. He'd stripped to the waist in the heat, and she saw them clearly this time. The scars on his back weren't random. They formed patterns, deliberate and cruel, the kind left by whips and worse things. She must have made a sound, because he turned and caught her staring. For a moment, she thought he'd be angry. Instead, he just pulled his shirt back on slowly, his face carefully blank. That evening, he spoke more than he ever had. They sat on the porch as the sun died, turning the desert red and gold, and he told her in broken sentences about the government school, how soldiers came when he was 8 and took him from his mother, how they cut his hair and beat him for speaking Navajo, how they tried to make him forget his name, his people, everything that made him who he was. "I run away," he said, staring out at the darkening land. 3 times. They catch me, bring me back. 4th time, I make it. But I am not Navajo anymore, not white. Nothing. He paused, struggling for words. Nowhere to go. So I go everywhere. Lenora felt something crack open in her chest. She knew about not belonging, about being trapped in a life that didn't fit. "My father sold me to Theodore," she said quietly. That's what marriage was, a transaction. Theodore wanted a wife who'd stay quiet and keep his house. I wanted to escape my father. We both got what we bargained for. She wrapped her arms around herself. When he died, I felt relieved. What kind of person feels relieved when their husband dies? Ashkey looked at her for a long moment. The kind who was not free before. The words hung between them, simple and true. They sat in silence after that, not uncomfortable, but full. 2 people who'd finally found someone who understood what it meant to be caged. When Ashkey finally stood to leave for the barn where he'd been sleeping, he paused at the steps. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing me." Lenora nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him walk away, knowing something between them had shifted, become real and dangerous and impossible to take back. The rider appeared 3 days later, dust rising behind him like a warning. Lenora recognized the territorial marshal's badge before she recognized the man wearing it. Garrett Stills, the name at the top of Theodore's debt ledger. 2 deputies flanked him, their hands resting casual on their gun belts. Ashkey was working near the well. He straightened slowly, his body going still in a way that reminded Lenora of a wolf sensing danger. Stills dismounted, his smile cold. "Mrs. Pritchett." Heard you finally made it out to claim your inheritance. Sorry about Theodore. Heart trouble's a bad way to go. What do you want, Marshal? Lenora kept her voice level. His eyes slid past her to Ashki. Want to know what that savage is doing on your property? We got laws about harboring Indians outside the reservation. He's my hired hand, Lenora said, the lie coming smooth. I need help running the post. Hired hand. Stills walked closer, studying Ashki like he was examining livestock. He got papers? Permission to be here? He's on my land, working for me. That's all the permission he needs. Stills laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's not how it works out here, Mrs. Pritchett. We got systems in place. Order to maintain. He turned back to Ashki. You. What's your name? Ashki didn't answer, his face carefully empty. One of the deputies moved his hand closer to his gun. He doesn't speak much English, Lenora said quickly. Marshal, I appreciate your concern, but I'm within my rights to employ who I choose on my own property. Your property. Stills pulled a folded paper from his vest. About that. Your husband owed me $200, due last month. Now that he's gone, that debt falls to you, along with all the others. He handed her the paper. You got 30 days to settle accounts, or I take possession of this place and everything on it. Lenora's hands shook as she read the numbers. 200 to Stills, another 300 scattered across 5 other creditors. She didn't have $50 to her name. Stills mounted his horse, looking down at her. Friendly advice, Mrs. Pritchett. That Indian's going to bring you nothing but trouble. Whatever crimes he's running from, whatever reason he's hiding out here, it'll come back on you. Send him away before someone gets hurt. After they left, Ashki walked over to where Lenora still stood, holding the paper. I should go, he said quietly. You cannot pay this with me here. I bring them to you. No. The word came out fiercer than she intended. This debt has nothing to do with you. It's Theodore's mess, and now it's mine. They will come back, Ashki said. Men like him always come back. Lenora looked at him, at the concern in his dark eyes, and realized with sudden clarity that she wasn't willing to lose this, whatever this was becoming. Let them come, she said. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Ashki began teaching Lenora how to survive in this unforgiving land, lessons Theodore had never bothered to share. He showed her which plants could draw poison from a wound and which ones would stop bleeding. How to read the sky for storms hours before they hit. How to move through brush without making a sound. She was a quick study, and she could see the approval in his eyes when she remembered his teachings. It was different from the way Theodore had looked at her, always measuring her against some standard she could never reach. Ashki saw her as capable, worthy of knowledge. In return, she taught him to read English from Theodore's ledgers. They sat together in the evenings, her finger tracing words while he repeated them carefully. His face would light up when he mastered a new sentence, a boyish joy that made him look younger than his years. They developed their own language, too. A mixture of Navajo, English, and gestures that belonged only to them. A tilt of the head, a certain tone. She found herself understanding him better than she'd ever understood anyone. One afternoon, tracking a wounded deer that had wandered onto the property, they ventured further than usual into the scrubland. The sky opened without warning, rain falling in sheets that turned the dust to mud in seconds. Ashki grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a small cave cut into the red rock. They pressed inside, breathless and soaked. The space was tight, barely enough room for 2 people. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the ground. Lenora shivered, and Ashki moved closer, sharing his warmth. She could feel his heartbeat through his wet shirt. Could smell sage and smoke, and something uniquely him. Her hand rested on his chest, and she realized she'd stopped thinking about propriety weeks ago. "Lenora," he said, his voice low. He only used her name when something mattered. She looked up at him. Water dripped from his hair onto her face. His eyes held a question he didn't know how to ask in either language. Without thinking, she traced the scar on his hand, the one shaped like a crescent moon. He caught her fingers gently, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. The rain continued outside, but inside the cave, time seemed to stop. Ashki raised her hand slowly to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that felt like a promise, like a prayer. "I see you," he whispered in Navajo, then in English. "I see all of you." Lenora's breath caught. No one had ever seen her before. Not really. She'd been invisible her entire life, a shadow in her father's house, a ghost in Theodore's. But Ashki saw her, and God help her, she saw him too. They came at night, 3 riders with faces covered by bandanas. Lenora woke to the sound of boots on her porch, heavy and deliberate. She grabbed the rifle, but the door burst open before she could reach it. They dragged Ashki from the barn while she screamed, hauling him into the yard like an animal. The moon was bright enough to see everything, bright enough to recognize Garrett Still's voice, even through the cloth covering his mouth. "Time somebody taught you a lesson about where you belong, Indian." The first punch dropped Ashki to his knees. He didn't fight back, didn't give them the excuse they wanted. They beat him methodically, taking turns, their fists landing with sickening thuds. Lenora ran toward them, but one of the deputies grabbed her, holding her back. "This is what happens," Still said, circling Ashki like a predator, "when savages forget their place, when white women forget theirs." He drew back his boot, aiming for Ashki's ribs. Lenora bit the hand covering her mouth, tasting blood. The deputy yelped and released her. She didn't run for help. She ran for the rifle she'd dropped. The shot cracked through the night, echoing off the rocks. All 3 men froze. Lenora stood on the porch, the rifle aimed steady at Stills's chest. Her hair loose around her shoulders, her nightgown mud-stained. She looked like something wild and dangerous. "Get off my property," she said, her voice deadly calm. "Now." "You just threatened a territorial marshal," Stills said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I fired into the air. Next one goes through you." She cocked the rifle again. "I'm a widow defending her home from masked intruders in the night. Any judge would call it justified." The deputies shifted nervously. Still stared at her for a long moment, then ripped off his bandana. His face was twisted with rage. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Pritchett. A big one. That Indian's turned you into something unnatural, something that needs to be corrected." "The only mistake I made was not shooting you when you first rode up." Lenora's finger tightened on the trigger. "Leave. Now. Before I change my mind about warning shots." They mounted and rode off, but Stills's voice carried back through the darkness. "This isn't over. 1 week, Mrs. Pritchett. 1 week to pay what's owed, or I take everything." Lenora dropped the rifle and ran to Ashki. He was trying to stand, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. She helped him up, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "You could have been killed," he said, touching her face gently. "For me." "Don't be stupid," she said, but her voice broke. "You're not leaving. I won't let them drive you away." He pulled her close, despite his injuries, and she felt his heart beating strong against hers. "You are fiercer than any warrior I have known." She held him tighter, knowing that everything had changed tonight. knowing there was no going back. Lenora spent 2 days going through every corner of the trading post, searching for anything she could sell. She found broken tools, moth-eaten blankets, Theodore's worthless trinkets. Nothing that would cover even half of what she owed. The number haunted her. $500. It might as well have been 5,000. Ashkey's face was still swollen from the beating, purple bruises blooming across his ribs. He moved carefully, but he moved. On the 3rd morning, he found her sitting at Theodore's desk, surrounded by ledgers and despair. "I will leave," he said quietly. "You pay debt easier without me." "Don't!" The word came out sharper than she intended. "Don't make this about you. The debt existed before you came. Stills is just using you as an excuse. Then what do we do?" "We." The word settled between them, precious and terrifying. Lenora looked at the ledgers again, at Theodore's messy handwriting, recording years of failed trades. Then she saw it. Entries from 3 years ago, regular. Trades with Navajo families. Good trades. Profitable ones. "Your people," she said slowly. "They used to come here. Before Theodore got sick. Before he stopped treating them fairly. They brought furs, silverwork, woven goods. Things Stills wants." She looked up at Ashkey. "If we could convince them to trade here again, we could get what we need." Ashkey was quiet for a long time. "My people will not trust a white woman, not after everything." "They might trust you." He shook his head. "I left. I am not one of them anymore." "Then we go together," Lenora said. "We tell them the truth, that I owe a debt, and that you've become important to me." She paused, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. "That you matter more than this property, more than my pride." Ashkey stared at her. "You would do this? Risk everything?" "I already risked everything when I pointed that rifle at Stills." She stood, moving around the desk to face him. "I'm not losing you because of Theodore's debts. I won't." He reached out slowly, cupping her face in his scarred hands. "If we do this, if we go to my people, they may refuse. They may tell me to stay away, and if they agree to trade, they will ask me to stay with them, to come home." "And what will you say?" Ashkey's thumb brushed her cheek. "That I have already found my home." The words hit her like a physical thing. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and brief and full of everything she couldn't say. When she pulled back, his eyes were bright. "We leave at dawn," she said. "Show me where your family is. We'll make this work." He nodded, then pulled her close, holding her like she was something precious, something worth fighting for. And for the first time since Theodore died, Lenora felt like she might actually be free. They traveled 3 days into territory Lenora had never seen, following paths only Ashkey could read. The land grew rougher, red rock rising into formations that looked like ancient cathedrals. On the 3rd evening, they saw the Hogans scattered across a valley, smoke rising from cooking fires. Ashkey grew quieter as they approached. People emerged from their homes, watching. An older woman stepped forward, her face lined with years and hardship. She spoke in rapid Navajo, her tone sharp as a blade. Ashkey answered, his voice steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. A younger woman joined them, her eyes moving between Ashkey and Lenora. "I am Ayasha," she said in clear English. "His sister. He says you need help." "We need to trade," Lenora said. "I have a post, good location, fair weights. I'll pay honest prices, better than what you'll get anywhere else." "Why should we trust a white woman?" Ayasha's voice was cold. Your people take everything and give nothing back. Lenora met her gaze. Because I'm asking, not taking. And because your brother matters to me. More than business. More than anything. Ayasha translated for the older woman, who Lenora realized must be Ashki's mother. The woman studied Lenora like she was reading a story written on her skin. Then she spoke, her words flowing like water. She says, Ayasha translated, that you have given her son something back, something the white man's school took from him. She sees it in his eyes. Lenora glanced at Ashki. He stood straighter here, despite the tension. More himself, somehow. His mother spoke again, longer this time. Ashki's face went rigid. She says we will trade with you, Ayasha said. But only if Ashki stays here, with his people, where he belongs. She paused. She says you can have the goods you need, but not him. He comes home, or there is no trade. Lenora's heart cracked open. This was the price. The goods that would save her property, or the man who'd saved her life. She looked at Ashki, saw the conflict in his eyes, and knew what she had to do. Then there's no trade, she said quietly. Ayasha blinked. You would lose everything? I'd lose everything if he stayed. Lenora turned to Ashki's mother and spoke directly to her, even though she knew the woman didn't understand English. Your son is a good man, the best I've ever known, and I won't force him to choose between his family and his freedom. If you want him home, it has to be his choice, not payment for pelts and silver. Ashki stepped forward. He spoke in Navajo, his voice strong and clear. His mother's eyes widened. Ayasha gasped. What did he say? Lenora asked. Ayasha looked at her with something like respect. He told our mother that he was dead when he came back from that school, but you made him remember how to live. He says his home is with you now. Ashki's mother was silent for a long time. Then she did something that shocked everyone. She smiled. She spoke to Ayasha, who translated with obvious surprise. She says you are either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both. She says any woman who would give up everything for her son deserves to keep him. Ayasha paused. She will trade with you, and she gives you both her blessing. The next 2 days were a blur of activity. Families brought furs, intricate silver jewelry, woven blankets in patterns that took Lenora's breath away. Ashki negotiated in Navajo while Lenora recorded everything carefully, making sure each family got fair value. His mother watched it all, and when they loaded the wagon, she pressed something into Lenora's hands. A small turquoise stone, smooth and warm. She says it is for protection, Ayasha said. For both of you. They made the 3-day journey back in 2, pushing hard. Stills was waiting when they arrived, sitting on Lenora's porch like he owned it. The smile on his face died when he saw the loaded wagon. What's this? He demanded. Payment, Lenora said. She began unloading, spreading goods across the porch. Beaver pelts, silver, woven blankets, all of it worth more than I owe. She handed him papers. Signed by tribal elders. Legal trade. Verified. Stills's face went dark red. This is stolen. Has to be. Then take it up with the territorial governor. Lenora pointed to a rider approaching. That's him there. Came to oversee a land dispute. Perfect timing, don't you think? The governor dismounted, examining the goods and papers. He nodded slowly. Looks legitimate, Marshal. Fair trade. Properly documented. He looked at Stills. I'd say the lady's debt is settled. With interest. Still's jaw worked. This isn't finished. Yes, Lenora said quietly. It is. Take your payment and get off my land. He loaded what he was owed into his saddlebags, each movement sharp with rage. Before mounting, he leaned close. You've made an enemy today, Mrs. Pritchett. I made an enemy the day I refused to be what you wanted me to be. After they left, Ashki took her hand. That night, they stood together in the creek where she'd first seen him. The moon turned the water silver, and everything felt possible. I need to tell you my full name, he said. My real name. The one they tried to take. He spoke it in Navajo, the syllables like music. It means, he who returns. Lenora smiled. And I'm not Mrs. Pritchett anymore. That woman died with Theodore. I'm just Lenora now. Just Lenora, he repeated, pulling her close. Who saved my life? Who fought for me? Who chose me? Who loves you? She whispered. The trading post thrived in the months that followed. Families came from miles around, drawn by fair prices and honest dealing. Lenora and Ashki married in a ceremony that honored both their worlds, witnessed by his family and the few townspeople brave enough to stand with them. She never turned her face away from him again. And in a land built on taking, they built something rare. Something that was theirs alone. Something that looked a lot like freedom. If this story touched your heart, click that like button and subscribe to this channel, because tomorrow we're bringing you another incredible true story that will leave you speechless. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.